The morning my neighbor told me to stay home changed everything.
Before we begin in Essen, I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop your city in the comments.
It was still dark outside when I heard the knock. Soft at first, then again, a little louder. I remember squinting at the clock on my nightstand. 5:03 a.m. For a few seconds, I thought I'd imagined it. Nobody knocked at my door that early. Not out here. Not in this quiet little street where nothing ever happened. The house was wrapped in silence, the kind of silence you get before sunrise, when even the birds haven't decided to sing yet. My husband Daniel was still asleep beside me, breathing slow, the blankets pulled up to his shoulders. Another knock. 3 times this time, firm, certain. My heart thudded a little faster. I sat up, pushed the blanket aside, and listened. Whoever it was didn't call my name, just knocked, patiently. Like they knew I was awake and waiting. I slipped on my robe and went to the window that looked out over the front yard. The porch light was still off, but the early dawn was starting to gray the sky. That's when I saw her. Mrs. Green, my next-door neighbor. She was standing on her porch, arms wrapped around herself in a shawl, her gray hair wild from sleep. I'd seen her almost every morning from my kitchen window, watering her plants, sweeping the steps, but we rarely spoke beyond a polite wave. She was one of those quiet, self-contained women, the kind you assume is harmless and a little lonely. Now she was at my door at 5 in the morning. I felt uneasy. Still, I walked down the hall, careful not to wake Daniel. When I opened the door, the air outside was cool and smelled faintly of rain. Mrs. Green's eyes were wide, serious. "Don't go to work today," she said, just like that. No hello, no explanation. I blinked at her. "I'm sorry?" She shook her head quickly. "Please, dear, just stay home. Trust me." Her voice trembled, not from age, but from something else. Fear, maybe. Urgency. I let out a nervous laugh. "Mrs. Green, are you all right? Did something happen?" "Nothing's wrong with me," she said. "But you mustn't go in today. Promise me." I remember standing there, robe tied tight around me, trying to make sense of it. I thought maybe she'd had a bad dream or mixed me up with someone else. I have a staff meeting this morning," I said carefully. "I can't just—" She reached out and gripped my hand. Her skin was cold. "Promise me, Ellen, don't leave this house until noon." Something about the way she said my name made me stop arguing. Her tone wasn't bossy or dramatic, it was pleading. After a long pause, I nodded just to calm her down. "Okay, I won't." Her shoulders relaxed. For a moment she looked like she might cry. Then she turned and hurried back toward her gate, her slippers whispering against the damp walkway. I watched her disappear into her own house and closed the door behind her. When I came back to bed, Daniel stirred. "Who was that?" He mumbled. "Mrs. Green," I whispered. "She said not to go to work today." He gave a sleepy chuckle. "That old lady watches too many mystery shows." "Yeah," I said softly. But I couldn't shake the feeling in my chest, like a weight pressing there. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, the faint glow of dawn creeping through the curtains. I told myself it was nothing, that she was probably confused. But the truth is, I felt unsettled. It wasn't just the words. It was her eyes, the way they seemed to carry something she couldn't say aloud. By 7 o'clock, Daniel had left for work. I made coffee and tried to go about my routine. The TV murmured the morning news. The smell of toast filled the kitchen, but every now and then, I'd glance toward the window, toward her house, half expecting her to appear again. She didn't. I thought about calling her daughter. I'd met her once, but decided against it. I didn't want to seem nosy. By 8, I was dressed, bag-packed, car keys in hand. The clock ticked steady in the hallway. My phone buzzed with reminders. Every part of me said to get going. But when I reached for the door handle, I froze. Mrs. Green's words echoed in my mind. "Don't leave this house until noon." It was ridiculous, I told myself. Superstitious nonsense. Yet something deep down, a quiet tug I couldn't name, held me back. I sighed, dropped my keys on the table, and sat down. "Fine," I muttered. "I'll wait a bit." Outside, the morning brightened slowly. The neighborhood came alive. Engines starting, children shouting, a dog barking somewhere down the street. But inside my house, everything felt strangely still. I didn't know it then, but that stillness was the first step toward everything that would unravel before noon. When I think back to that morning, what strikes me most isn't the fear I felt. It's how ordinary everything seemed before it. Life has a way of wrapping you in routine so tightly that you stop seeing the cracks. For 27 years, I'd lived in that same brick house at the end of Maple Street. 2 bedrooms, a small garden, a porch swing that Daniel promised he'd fix but never did. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Or at least that's what I like to tell myself. Daniel and I had met in our 20s. He was the charming one, easy smile, deep laugh, the kind of man who could talk anyone into anything. Back then, I found that irresistible. He worked in construction management. I taught art at the local elementary school. We built a simple life, raised 2 children, and when they left for college, the house got quiet. The kind of quiet you have to grow used to. In those early empty nest years, Daniel started working longer hours. I told myself it made sense, the bills, the house, the future. And maybe I wanted to believe that everything was fine, because the alternative felt too heavy to face. Our evenings had a rhythm. He'd come home after dark, smelling faintly of sawdust and aftershave. We'd eat dinner while watching the evening news. He'd ask about my day. I'd ask about his. Small talk, safe talk. But the deeper conversations, the ones about dreams, fears, or even small joys, had faded away somewhere along the line. It's strange how a marriage can feel full but hollow at the same time. You tell yourself it's normal, that this is just how things are when you've been together for decades. But deep down, I'd begun to sense a distance that words couldn't bridge. Mrs. Green lived alone next door. She'd moved there 6 years earlier, after her husband passed. Most people on our street barely noticed her. She kept her curtains drawn, but her yard was always tidy, the rose bushes trimmed with care. When I'd see her at the mailbox, she'd smile. That small, polite kind of smile that never quite reached the eyes. Sometimes when I watered my plants, I'd catch her watching me from her porch. Not in a strange way, more like quiet observation, as if she saw something I didn't. I'd wave. She'd wave back. And that was that. I didn't know her story. People said she used to be a nurse. Others said she'd once lived up north and moved here after her husband's sudden passing. She had a daughter who visited occasionally. I'd seen the car in her driveway, license plates from another state. But most days, Mrs. Green kept to herself, the kind of neighbor who was invisible until she wasn't. That particular week had started like any other. Monday, grocery run, laundry. Tuesday, Art club at the community center. Wednesday, late dinner with Daniel because he had a site meeting. Thursday, silence between us. The kind that fills a room even when you try not to notice. Then, Friday came, the morning of her knock. Looking back, I realized there had been signs, faint ones, whispering in the background of my days. A phone call Daniel declined the moment I walked in. A perfume that wasn't mine on one of his shirts. A second toothbrush that appeared in his travel bag after his last conference. Tiny things I brushed aside, because facing them would mean facing what I feared most, that maybe I wasn't enough anymore. Sometimes denial isn't ignorance, it's protection. That morning, after Mrs. Green's warning, I sat in my kitchen trying to convince myself that everything was normal. Daniel had left early, coffee in hand, humming like he always did when he felt good about something. I told myself he deserved that good mood, but there was something almost too light in his step, the kind of happiness that didn't include me. I poured myself another cup of coffee, the mug warming my hands. Outside, the sun had climbed high enough to paint the windows with gold. The neighborhood shimmered with routine, the distant sound of sprinklers, the hum of a lawnmower. Ordinary life, the life I thought I knew. After breakfast, I drifted through the house, straightening picture frames and watering the fern by the window. Old habits, small motions that gave me a sense of purpose. I paused at a photograph on the mantel, Daniel and me at the beach years ago, wind in our hair, our son holding a kite. We looked happy. Maybe we were. Maybe happiness, like everything else, just fades slowly until you don't notice it's gone. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Hope you made it to work okay. Big day ahead. Love you. I stared at the words. He'd sent it automatically, like clockwork, the same line he sent every morning. But that day, I was still in my kitchen, barefoot, the coffee now cold. A small unease stirred inside me. Why had Mrs. Green been so certain? Why me? I thought about walking over to check on her, to ask if she was feeling all right, but I hesitated. Something told me to give her space. Or maybe, in truth, I didn't want to look into eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Around 9, I sat by the window and opened my sketchbook. Drawing had always been my refuge, lines and shapes where thoughts could breathe. But that morning every stroke felt shaky. My mind kept returning to Daniel, to Mrs. Green, to the uneasy silence between the two moments, his departure and her warning. If you've made it this far, you're one of the few people who truly listens deeply. I'd love to know which idea so far has made you stop and think the most. Leave a thought below, and I'll feature one in the next episode. I told myself to stop being dramatic. People worry for no reason sometimes. Still, I couldn't shake the image of her hand gripping mine. Cold, trembling, urgent, I decided I'd call in sick. I left a voicemail for the office, saying I wasn't feeling well. My boss, kind woman that she was, would understand. And then I waited. Time moved strangely that morning, slow yet heavy, like the air before a storm. I made a second pot of coffee I didn't drink. I watched a talk show I couldn't follow. Every few minutes I glanced toward the clock, wondering what exactly would happen at noon. At 10:30 the phone rang. I almost jumped out of my chair. It wasn't Mrs. Green. It was Daniel. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, voice light. "You sound wide awake for once," I joked. He laughed. "Early start. Big inspection today. Should be home late again." "Where's the site today?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He paused just a hair too long. Downtown, he said finally. Near the river. Be careful, I murmured. Always am, he replied, then hung up. But something about that hesitation made my stomach twist. It was as if he'd been caught mid-lie and had to smooth it over before I noticed. I told myself not to dwell on it. Yet part of me wondered if Mrs. Green somehow knew something about him. Had she seen something? Heard something? I brushed the thought aside. Too strange, too far-fetched. Instead, I turned the TV back on, turned up the volume, and tried to drown out my own thoughts. By 11, the sky had shifted, sunlight dimming behind slow-moving clouds. A quiet tension settled over the house. Even the air felt different, heavy with waiting. I looked across the yard toward Mrs. Green's home. Her curtains were drawn. No movement. No sign of her at all. I wondered if she was sitting behind those curtains, watching me, making sure I stayed. And for reasons I couldn't name, that thought didn't feel intrusive. It felt protective. I remember whispering to myself, almost like a prayer. I hope you're okay, Mrs. Green. And I hope I will be too. That was the life I thought I knew. A quiet street, a steady marriage, a kind neighbor. But just beneath that calm surface, something was already unraveling. And by the time the clock struck noon, the world I'd built for decades would no longer exist the way it had before. They say when a picture frame tilts just slightly, most people don't notice. But if you stare long enough, you can't unsee it. That's what my life had become. A tilted picture I kept trying to straighten, even though I knew something underneath was shifting. That morning after Mrs. Green's visit, time seemed to drag like a heavy curtain. Every tick of the clock reminded me of her words. Don't leave this house until noon. At first, I thought she'd meant there'd be an accident or some danger outside. But as the hours passed quietly, that explanation started to feel less likely. No news alerts, no sirens, no sudden disasters. Just stillness. By mid-morning, I began to question everything, including myself. Maybe she'd imagined something. Maybe I was imagining things. Yet deep down, I couldn't shake the sense that this stillness was the warning itself, that something was about to surface in a different way. When you've been married for decades, you learn the rhythm of another person's life, the sounds they make when they're content, the way they breathe when they lie. The smallest changes become thunder if you know how to listen. Lately, Daniel had been different. More distant, yes, but not cold. That would have been easier to spot. No, he was careful, like a man walking across thin ice, choosing every step so it wouldn't crack. He'd come home smelling faintly of cologne he'd never worn before. Not strong, but new. And his phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, had become something sacred, always in his pocket, face down, silent. There were small things, too. Like how he'd started humming in the mornings again. It wasn't the song that bothered me. It was the kind of hum a man does when he has something, or someone, on his mind. A few weeks earlier, I'd found a restaurant receipt in his jacket pocket. Dinner for 2, wine, 1 dessert. But the date and time didn't match any of his work events. When I'd asked about it, he didn't miss a beat. Oh, that? Client dinner. You know how it goes. And maybe I did. Maybe I just didn't want to know what it really meant. I'd smiled, handed it back, and tucked the doubt away like a note in a drawer I wasn't ready to open. That morning, as I sat on the couch with the TV playing softly, my eyes kept wandering to the window, to Mrs. Green's house. I thought about how she'd looked when she said those words. Not panicked, not confused, but almost burdened, like she was carrying knowledge she didn't want. Something about her expression haunted me. Then, just before noon, I heard movement next door. A door opening, the faint sound of her broom sweeping across the porch. It was such a normal sound that it grounded me. I smiled to myself, grateful for that tiny slice of ordinary life. Maybe she was fine after all. Maybe this whole thing was just an overreaction, a strange morning that would fade into memory. So I decided I'd visit her later, bring over a small pie from the bakery, and thank her for worrying about me. That's what neighbors do, right? But then something else tugged at me, a quiet question that felt heavier with every passing minute. If Mrs. Green had warned me not to leave, what was I supposed to see or avoid by staying? I stood by the window again, watching the world outside. Cars passed. Sunlight danced across the pavement, and a single bird hopped along the fence. Everything looked normal, yet normal didn't feel safe anymore. It's strange. You can live beside someone for years, share fences and smiles, yet know nothing about the storms they've weathered. And sometimes, those storms make them see what others can't. At 11:45, I decided to check my emails, mostly to distract myself. That's when I noticed one from Daniel's office manager. It wasn't meant for me. It was part of a forwarded chain about a work schedule. In it, she mentioned, Daniel's taking the day off. He said he needed a break. I froze. He'd told me that morning he had a big inspection near the river. He'd even sounded excited about it. But according to this email, he wasn't at work at all. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. My hands went cold. I reread the message, hoping I'd misinterpreted it, that there was another Daniel, another explanation. But deep down, I knew. I felt the crack widen in that picture I'd been clinging to. The first wave was confusion. Then came a strange kind of calm. Not anger, not even hurt, just clarity. I remember whispering to myself, so that's what this is. Mrs. Green's face flashed in my mind again. Her urgency, her trembling hand. Was this what she'd meant? Did she somehow know Daniel wasn't where he said he'd be? I tried calling him, once, twice, no answer. The third time, his phone went straight to voicemail. My heartbeat grew loud in my ears. I thought about getting in my car and driving to his office, but something inside me said, don't. And whether it was fear or intuition, I listened. Instead, I walked to the front window again. The world outside was bright and alive, but I felt completely detached from it. A woman watering her plants across the street waved at me. I waved back, pretending everything was fine. By then, the clock had reached noon, and right as the hand struck 12, I heard the sound. A loud, muffled thud from outside. It wasn't close, but it was enough to make me flinch. Then came the wail of sirens in the distance. Faint at first, then growing louder. Ambulance, police. Something bad had happened nearby. My knees weakened. I sat down, trembling, watching the light shift across the living room floor. Mrs. Green's warning rang louder in my head than the sirens themselves. Don't leave the house until noon. Until noon. For the next hour, I sat frozen, the TV still murmuring in the background. Then my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I opened it without thinking. It was a photo. A familiar car parked outside a downtown motel. Daniel's car. Below it, a short message. You deserve to know. I didn't recognize the number. But I didn't have to. My heart already knew. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. I felt the kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from shock. A stillness that feels endless. It took me nearly an hour to gather the courage to walk next door. When Mrs. Green opened the door, she didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, she looked relieved. "I know," I said quietly. She nodded, eyes glistening. "I didn't want you to find out there," she whispered. "You needed to be safe when you did." Her words confused me, but they also comforted me. She led me inside, the scent of lavender filling the small living room. There were framed photos of her husband, her daughter, a younger Mrs. Green smiling beside a man in uniform. She gestured for me to sit. "I saw him," she said softly. "Your husband, yesterday. He wasn't where he said he'd be. I thought maybe I was wrong, but when I saw him again this morning—" She hesitated. "Something in my heart told me I couldn't let you go out there, not until you were ready." I didn't cry right away. Instead, I sat there in silence, staring at the floor. Her voice washed over me like a lullaby for something breaking inside me. Sometimes the truth doesn't explode. It unravels gently, thread by thread, until all that's left is the bare fabric of what really was. That day, in Mrs. Green's living room, I finally saw my life for what it had become. Not the picture I'd painted for years, but the truth hiding beneath it. And though it hurt, though it shattered every illusion I'd been clinging to, part of me felt grateful. Grateful that someone had cared enough to stop me from finding out alone, in the middle of the world, where I couldn't fall apart safely. After that day, I couldn't look at my house the same way again. Every hallway, every photograph, every half-used coffee mug felt like it belonged to someone else's life. It's strange how quickly a truth can change the air around you. One moment you're safe in the world you built, and the next, it's just walls holding the echo of a lie. Mrs. Green's living room was small, but warm. She'd kept the curtains half drawn, letting in a soft stripe of light that cut across the carpet. The faint smell of lavender and old books hung in the air. She'd made tea, but I hadn't touched it. I just sat there, hands trembling around the cup, staring at the steam rising like ghosts. She didn't speak for a while, and I was grateful for that silence. Sometimes words are too heavy when your heart is still catching up to reality. "Finally," she said softly, "I didn't mean to frighten you this morning. I just knew if I didn't say something, you'd be hurt worse than you already were." Her voice cracked a little on the last few words. I looked at her, studying her face, the lines around her mouth, the tired kindness in her eyes. "What did you see, Mrs. Green?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, twisting her hands together. "I saw your husband yesterday. I was taking out the trash when I noticed his truck parked 2 blocks over near the old motel. I thought maybe he was working there. You know, a new site or something. But then I saw him get out and he wasn't alone." Her words floated between us like dust in the light. I didn't ask who the other woman was. Somehow, not knowing felt kinder than putting a name or a face to it. Mrs. Green continued, "I told myself to stay out of it. It's not my place. But this morning, when I saw him drive past again so early, looking the way men do when they're hiding something, I couldn't just watch you leave for work like nothing was wrong." I swallowed hard. "I wouldn't have believed you," I admitted. She nodded slowly. "I know. That's why I didn't try to explain. I just wanted to keep you still, long enough for the truth to reach you on its own." When I walked back to my house, the sky had darkened, a faint drizzle tapping on the porch roof. I stood there for a long moment, keys in hand, wondering if crossing that threshold would make it real. Inside, everything was exactly as we'd left it that morning. Daniel's empty mug by the sink, his jacket draped over the chair, the faint scent of his aftershave still hanging in the air. For the first time in years, I didn't tidy anything. I just sat down on the couch and let the silence surround me. My mind wandered to all the times I'd brushed away small signs. The late meetings, the phone turned face down, the sudden bursts of cheerfulness that never included me, little cracks in the picture, all leading to this. It's easy to look back and see the path so clearly, but when you're walking it, you only see one step at a time. I spent the rest of that afternoon moving from room to room like a ghost in my own life. At one point, I opened our closet, his closet, and stood there staring at the neat rows of shirts. Blue, gray, white, all pressed, all carefully arranged. It made me ache that I still cared whether they stayed that way. On the top shelf sat a small leather box where he kept spare change and receipts. I'd never paid it much attention, but that day something made me reach for it. Inside were old business cards, folded notes, and one hotel key card. It was printed with the name of the same motel Mrs. Green had mentioned. I closed the box slowly and set it back where it belonged. I didn't need more proof. The truth was enough. That evening I didn't cook dinner. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat near the window, watching the rain blur the world outside. Around 7, Daniel called. His voice was calm, almost cheerful. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm gonna be a little late. Traffic's a mess." I listened quietly, my heart oddly still. Then I said, "It's fine. Take your time." He thanked me, told me he loved me, and hung up. I didn't cry after that call. The tears would come later, but at that moment, I felt an unexpected sense of clarity, like my life had split in two, and I finally knew which half was real. The next morning, I woke before sunrise again. This time no knock came at the door, but I looked toward Mrs. Green's house anyway, half expecting her to be there, watching over me the way she had the day before. Her porch light was on, warm against the fading night. I poured coffee and sat at the table, thinking about her. How easily I'd overlooked her all those years. We'd lived side by side, both tending our small gardens, both keeping our pain tucked away where no one could see. And yet, when it mattered, she'd been the only one who saw clearly. I realized then that her warning hadn't been just about danger. It was about timing. She hadn't stopped me from going to work. She'd stopped me from walking straight into a lie I wasn't ready to face. She'd given me a few quiet hours to discover the truth on my own terms. That was an act of mercy I hadn't understood until now. Over the next few days, Daniel acted as if nothing had changed. He laughed, he told stories about work, he kissed my cheek at breakfast. But everything felt hollow. I could hear the falseness behind every word. I started spending more time outside, tending the garden. It gave me a reason to be near Mrs. Green without admitting I needed the comfort. She never pried. She'd just hand me a cup of lemonade or ask about my roses or talk about the weather. And somehow, those small conversations steadied me. One afternoon, she said something that stayed with me. People don't always mean to hurt each other. But when they do, you still get to choose whether to keep bleeding or start healing. Her words sank deep, like gentle truth laid over an old wound. I didn't answer. But that night, for the first time in weeks, I slept. Days turned into a quiet pattern. Daniel left early, came home late. We lived in the same house, but in different worlds. Sometimes I wondered if he noticed the distance between us, the way I no longer reached for his hand, the way my eyes no longer followed him. He didn't ask, and I didn't tell. There's a kind of silence that grows too thick to break. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name in careful handwriting. Inside was a single photograph. Daniel, standing in front of the motel, arm around a woman I didn't recognize. No message, no explanation, only proof. Real, undeniable, printed proof. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at it. And then, almost without thinking, I slid it into a drawer and closed it. I didn't need to confront him yet. The truth was already living inside me, reshaping everything. That night, Mrs. Green called. She'd never phoned me before. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "I think so," I said. "I'm just tired." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sometimes when the world feels too heavy, it helps to talk to someone who remembers how to breathe through it." I smiled faintly. "You're very wise, Mrs. Green. I've had my share of mornings like yours," she said. And in that moment I understood. She wasn't just my neighbor. She was someone who'd stood in this same space once, holding a truth that had changed everything. That night, after I hung up, I walked to the porch. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of wet earth and lilac. Across the yard, Mrs. Green's porch light flickered gently in the dark. I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you." She couldn't hear me, but somehow I knew she felt it. I remember that morning so clearly it still feels close enough to touch. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and freshly cut grass. The kind of quiet morning where the world seems calm, too calm, as if it's holding its breath before something happens. I woke up earlier than usual. Daniel was already gone. He'd left a note on the counter that said, "Early meeting. Back for dinner. Love you." I stared at the words for a long time. They didn't sting the way they used to. They just felt hollow, like a song you've heard too many times to believe anymore. I made my coffee, poured it into my favorite mug, the one with the little chip on the rim, and stood by the window, watching Mrs. Green's house. Her curtains were open. I could see her silhouette moving slowly around her kitchen. Something about her presence always calmed me now. She didn't need to speak. Just knowing she was there, across the fence, felt like having a quiet guardian nearby. That morning, I had a strange feeling in my chest. Not fear exactly, but a sense that something was about to end. I'd been living in half-truths for too long, and even though I didn't plan to, I think part of me knew today would be the day I stopped pretending. Around noon, I decided to go for a walk. I told myself it was just to clear my head, but I knew where I was going. The motel Mrs. Green had mentioned wasn't far, maybe a 10-minute drive. I'd passed it hundreds of times before, never giving it a second thought, but now it was all I could think about. When I reached the parking lot, my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. Daniel's truck was there, parked near the back, half hidden behind a row of hedges. For a moment, I sat there in silence, listening to the soft ticking of the engine. Part of me wanted to turn around and go home, to leave the truth alone. But another part, the quiet, steady part that had woken up inside me since that morning Mrs. Green knocked on my door, refused to stay silent. I stepped out of the car. If you've made it this far, you're one of the few people who truly listens deeply. I'd love to know which idea so far has made you stop and think the most. Leave a thought below, and I'll feature one in the next episode. The pavement was still wet from rain, glistening in the noon sun. Every sound seemed louder. The distant hum of traffic, the squawk of a bird, the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. I walked up the narrow path toward the rooms. Each step felt heavier than the last. And then, halfway down the row, I saw him. Daniel came out of a room laughing. A woman followed him, younger, maybe in her 30s, with bright red hair and a smile that made my stomach twist. He reached for her hand as they walked toward his truck, and something inside me finally went quiet, not broken. Just quiet, like the end of a storm. He didn't see me at first. I stood there, half hidden behind a parked car, watching as he kissed her cheek before opening the truck door for her. It was such a small, ordinary gesture, something he hadn't done for me in years, and that's when he looked up. Our eyes met across the lot. For a moment, time stopped. His smile disappeared. The color drained from his face. He froze, caught between two lives. I didn't speak, didn't yell, didn't cry. I just turned around and walked back to my car. Behind me, I heard him call my name, but the sound barely reached me. It was as if his voice came from another world, one I'd already left behind. I don't remember much of the drive home. The road blurred, my thoughts tangled. All I knew was that something inside me had shifted for good. The woman who had left the house that morning wasn't the same one who came back. When I pulled into the driveway, Mrs. Green was outside, trimming her rose bushes. She looked up immediately. Our eyes met, and I think she understood everything without a word. She put down her shears and walked toward me. I got out of the car, still holding my keys like they were the only solid thing in the world. She reached out and gently touched my arm. "Did you see what you needed to see?" she asked softly. "Yes," I whispered. "And more than that." She nodded slowly, her eyes full of something deeper than pity, understanding. Then she said the simplest thing, but it was what I needed most. "Come inside." Inside her home, I sat in the same chair as before, staring at the same teacup she always offered. But this time I took a sip. It was warm and sweet, and somehow it steadied me. She didn't press for details. She didn't need to. She just let me sit there, breathing, until the silence softened. Finally, she said, "You know, Ellen, endings don't always come when people stop loving each other. Sometimes they come when one person finally learns to love themselves again." Her words broke something open inside me. For years, I'd built my life around keeping everything together: the house, the routines, the image of happiness. But somewhere in all that holding on, I'd lost sight of myself. I looked at her and said quietly, "I don't even know who I am without him." Mrs. Green smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time to find out." That evening, Daniel came home earlier than usual. I was sitting at the kitchen table when he walked in. He looked nervous, pale, fidgeting, unsure how to begin. "Ellen," he said softly, "I can explain." I raised my hand, stopping him. "No, you don't have to," I said. He blinked, confused. "I saw you," I continued, my voice calm, almost detached. "I don't need an explanation. I just need honesty." He sank into the chair across from me, his eyes filling with tears. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he whispered. I believed him. But that didn't change what he'd done. I know, I said gently. But you did. The silence stretched between us, long and painful. For the first time, he couldn't hide behind charm or excuses. And for the first time, I didn't feel small sitting across from him. I felt steady. I think we both know, I said quietly. This is the end of something. He looked down, nodding slowly. There were no fights, no shouting, no slammed doors. Just two people finally facing the truth. That night, I packed a small bag and drove to my sister's for a few days. I needed space, not to escape, but to breathe. When I returned, Daniel had moved out. He left a note on the table. I'm sorry for everything. I hope one day you'll forgive me. I folded it carefully and tucked it into the same drawer where I'd hidden the photograph. Not out of love, out of closure. The following morning, I woke to find a small box on my porch. Inside was a note from Mrs. Green. It read, "You've walked through fire, my dear, and you didn't burn. When you're ready, come over. I've got fresh pie cooling." I laughed softly, the first real laugh in what felt like months. And I cried too, because sometimes healing begins with something as simple as knowing someone cares. That day, I walked across the yard and joined her for pie. We sat in her kitchen, two women from different worlds bound by shared understanding. We talked about flowers, the weather, recipes, ordinary things that somehow felt sacred now. At one point, she said, "You know, life has a funny way of bringing the right people to your door, sometimes literally." I smiled through tears. "I'm glad you knocked that morning," I said softly. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm glad you opened the door." As the afternoon sunlight spilled across her kitchen table, I realized something important. What happened wasn't just an ending. It was also a beginning. I wasn't the woman I'd been before that day. I was stronger, quieter, and somehow freer. Mrs. Green had once said that the people we overlook are sometimes the ones guarding us from fate. And now I understood. If she hadn't knocked that morning, I might have been at work, hours away, when everything came crashing down. I would have come home to a lie I wasn't ready to see. But because of her, I faced it with open eyes. And though it hurt, it also saved me. That was the day that changed everything, not because I lost a husband, but because I found myself. And in the quiet after all the noise, I found something even more precious, a friend who saw me when I didn't even see myself. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't knock on your door like Mrs. Green did that morning, or come wrapped in some perfect movie-style closure. It comes in pieces, small, uneven, sometimes sharp. Some days you pick one up and hold it close. Other days, you just stare at the mess and wonder how to start. For a long time after Daniel left, the house felt too big. Every sound echoed. The creak of the stairs, the hum of the refrigerator, even the sound of my own footsteps. It was strange how a place that had once felt so full of life could suddenly feel hollow. The first few mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up expecting to hear his keys jangling or his shoes by the door. But instead, there was only silence, the kind that forces you to meet yourself. I started making lists to fill the empty hours. Water the garden, sort the closet, call my sister, make something new for dinner. It wasn't about being productive. It was about reminding myself that life was still happening, even if it looked different now. Mrs. Green became my anchor through those quiet days. We developed a kind of unspoken routine, little visits that gave shape to the loneliness. Some mornings, she'd bring me muffins wrapped in a towel, still warm from her oven. Other times, she'd invite me over to help her repot her plants or organize her attic. At first, I thought she was just being kind. But after a while, I realized she needed the company too. We were two women at different stages of the same story, both learning how to live again after losing something we thought was permanent. One afternoon, while we were sitting on her porch, she handed me a small photo album. "I want you to see something," she said. Inside were old photographs, her and her husband, Robert. They looked happy in the pictures, smiling at picnics, holding hands by a lake, dancing in what looked like their living room. But near the end of the album, the pictures changed. There were no more smiles, just empty chairs. "He left me," she said softly, tracing her finger along the edge of one photograph. "I was about your age when it happened. Found out he'd fallen in love with someone else, a woman from his church choir of all places." She gave a small, sad smile. "I thought my life was over. I didn't think I could breathe without him, but eventually I did. I learned how." She closed the album and looked at me. "You will too." Something about hearing it from her, not as advice but as proof, made my chest loosen just a little. For the first time, I could imagine a future where I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I began to spend more time outdoors. The garden became my therapy. Every seed I planted, every weed I pulled, felt like a step toward something cleaner inside me. Mrs. Green and I would spend hours side by side, pruning, watering, talking about everything and nothing. One day, she said, "Do you know why I love gardening?" I shook my head, because it reminds me that beauty can grow from broken things. The soil is full of decay, old roots and forgotten seeds, and still, somehow, life pushes through. I remember smiling at that. It sounded like something out of a poem, but she said it like it was simple truth. As weeks passed, I noticed small changes in myself. I stopped checking my phone for messages that never came. I started sleeping through the night again, and every morning, when I looked in the mirror, I began to recognize the woman staring back, not as someone lost, but as someone coming home to herself. My sister called often, trying to convince me to move in with her. She meant well, but I told her, "I need to stay here a while. I need to learn how to be alone without feeling lonely." It was true. For years I'd built my identity around being Daniel's wife. Now I was learning how to be just Ellen. It was uncomfortable at first, like wearing new shoes that didn't quite fit. But slowly they started to feel right. One Sunday I decided to go back to church, something I hadn't done in years. I sat near the back, alone, unsure if I even belonged there anymore. But when the choir began to sing, something inside me cracked open. It wasn't sadness this time. It was gratitude for surviving, for still being here, for the neighbor who'd cared enough to warn me that morning, for the strange, quiet path that had led me to myself. When the service ended, the pastor said something that stayed with me. Forgiveness doesn't mean saying what happened was okay. It means choosing to stop carrying the weight of it. I went home and thought about that all afternoon. And that night I wrote a letter to Daniel. I didn't send it. It wasn't for him. It was for me. The letter said, "I forgive you, not because you asked for it, but because I can't carry this forever. You hurt me deeply, but I won't let that pain decide who I become. I'm letting go of the anger, the shame, the need for answers. I wish you peace, and I wish myself freedom." When I finished, I folded the letter neatly and tucked it under a small box of keepsakes, next to our wedding photo. It felt like closing a chapter, not out of bitterness, but out of love for the woman I was finally becoming. A few weeks later, Mrs. Green fell ill. Nothing serious, just a seasonal cold. I brought her soup and sat by her bedside, reading aloud from one of her favorite books. At one point, she took my hand and said, "You remind me of my daughter. She passed away years ago. I never thought I'd feel that kind of closeness again." Her words brought tears to my eyes. "You remind me of the mother I wish I had," I told her. We both laughed softly, wiping our eyes. It was strange, the way love finds its way through the cracks life leaves behind. By early spring, the garden was blooming again. The roses, the lilies, even the stubborn hydrangeas, all alive, all bright. Mrs. Green and I stood there one morning admiring them. She said, "Look at that." "You've done more healing here than any doctor ever could," I smiled. I think we both have. For the first time in months, the air felt light. I wasn't counting days anymore or waiting for anything to change. I had peace, quiet, steady peace. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea. Across the yard, Mrs. Green's house glowed softly, her window light spilling onto the grass, the same light that had been on the morning she saved me. I thought about how different things could have been if I'd ignored her knock, if I'd gone to work that day like always. Maybe I would have kept pretending for months, even years. Maybe I would have lost myself completely in the process. But fate, in its strange mercy, had sent me a neighbor who saw what I couldn't. Not just the truth about my husband, but the truth about my own strength. And in the quiet of that night, I whispered a prayer of gratitude for pain that didn't destroy me, for kindness that came when I least expected it, and for the courage to begin again. The pieces of healing didn't come perfectly, and they didn't come fast. But they came, one honest moment at a time, and little by little I became whole again. Spring was slowly giving way to summer. The mornings were warmer now, and the sun spilled through the windows in golden streaks. The garden bloomed with colors I hadn't noticed before. Deep pink roses, white lilies, lavender swaying gently in the breeze. It seemed like the world was waking up again, and somehow I was waking up with it. That morning, I found a letter slipped under my front door. I didn't recognize the handwriting at first, but my heart froze when I saw who it was from. Daniel. I picked it up carefully, like it was fragile glass. Part of me wanted to toss it, to leave the past buried where it belonged. But something made me unfold it slowly and read. "Ellen, I know there's nothing I can say to undo the hurt I caused you. I've spent these weeks in silence, thinking about every moment, every choice. I see now that I betrayed you in the worst possible way, and I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope you find peace. I will leave you to your life, to the happiness you deserve. I am sorry, truly sorry. Goodbye." I folded it back and held it in my hands for a long time. No apology could erase what happened. No words could fix the days we had lost. And yet, reading it brought a strange sense of closure. I felt the last threads of anger unravel a little. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I just felt ready. Ready to step into the life I had been rebuilding, fully and without looking back. Later that afternoon, I drove over to Mrs. Green's house. Her porch was bathed in sunlight, and I could hear the soft hum of her radio through the open window. She greeted me with a warm smile, her hands dusted with soil from her latest gardening project. I held up the letter. "I got this today," I said quietly. She took it from me and read it slowly, her lips pressing together thoughtfully. When she finished, she looked at me with kind eyes. "Closure," she said simply, "and now the rest is yours to write." Her words reminded me that healing isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about reclaiming your life, piece by piece, moment by moment. And I realized that my story wasn't over yet. It was just beginning a new chapter. That evening, I sat on the porch with Mrs. Green, sharing iced tea and watching the sun dip behind the trees. We didn't need to speak about Daniel. We didn't need to talk about betrayal or heartbreak. Silence felt right, comfortable even. It was the kind of silence that builds trust, the kind that makes ordinary moments feel sacred. After a while, she asked me softly, "Are you ready to say goodbye?" I thought about Daniel, about the years we had shared, and the lie he had lived alongside me. It wasn't easy to admit, but I was. "Yes," I said, and not with bitterness, just understanding that I deserve more than what I had. She smiled, squeezing my hand gently. "You always did." The next day, I went through our old photographs. Wedding pictures, family gatherings, birthday parties, all the memories we had made together. I sorted them into 2 piles, one to keep, one to store away. The pile to keep wasn't for him. It wasn't about clinging to the past. It was about remembering myself in those moments. The laughter, the joy, the little pieces of who I was before betrayal. The pile to store away was for the times I'd felt hurt, unseen, or abandoned. I didn't throw them out. I simply acknowledged them and set them aside. It was my way of saying goodbye without erasing the lessons. In the following weeks, my routine became steadier. I cooked more, walked in the mornings, and spent afternoons with Mrs. Green tending the garden. I even started volunteering at the local library, reading stories to children on Saturday mornings. It felt good to give something back, to feel useful and connected again. Every day, I noticed small signs of growth. My laughter returned more easily. My sleep deepened, and the empty spaces in my home no longer felt lonely. Even my interactions with strangers changed. I found myself smiling at neighbors in passing, helping someone carry groceries, or holding the door for someone struggling with a stroller. Life was ordinary in the best possible way. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like mine again. One afternoon, as Mrs. Green and I were pruning her rose bushes, she stopped and looked at me. "You know," she said, "it takes courage to forgive and to let go. Most people never do it. They carry the hurt with them, letting it fester. But not you. You chose differently." I wiped my hands on my apron and nodded. I wanted to hurt him for a moment. I admit it, but I realized that holding on to that pain would only hurt me more. She smiled softly. "You've done more than survive, Ellen. You've learned to live again." And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet strength that I hadn't realized I possessed. The kind of strength that doesn't shout or demand attention. It simply exists, steady and unwavering, like the roots of a tree buried deep in the soil. Weeks turned into months. Daniel's presence in my life became a memory that no longer haunted me. The pain, the betrayal, the endless questions, they were still there, but they no longer defined me. I could think of him without trembling. I could remember what we had without wishing it back. And all the while, Mrs. Green was there, my friend, my confidant, My reminder that kindness and loyalty exist even in a world that sometimes feels cruel. One evening, we sat on her porch watching the sun set. I told her about my plans to take a short trip, somewhere I could be alone with my thoughts, but also see the world outside my small town. "You deserve it," she said. "You've earned it." I smiled, the warmth in my chest spreading like the last light of the day. That night I went home and looked around my house. It was the same place it had always been, but it felt different now. Not empty, not hollow, full of quiet possibility. I realized that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means making peace with the past, forgiving what you can, and choosing to live fully in the present. I wrote one more note that evening, not to Daniel, but to myself. "Ellen, you are stronger than you know. You survived betrayal. You faced heartbreak. You were brave enough to forgive. And now you get to live." I folded it and placed it in my journal, a reminder of the woman I had become. By the time I went to bed that night, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in years. The pieces of healing weren't perfect, and they weren't complete, but they were real, and that was enough. Somewhere across the yard, I could see the faint glow of Mrs. Green's porch light. It reminded me of the morning she knocked on my door, the morning that had changed everything. If you've made it this far, you're one of the few people who truly listens deeply. I'd love to know which idea so far has made you stop and think the most. Leave a thought below, and I'll feature one in the next episode. I whispered a quiet thank you into the night, not just for her, but for the journey she had guided me through. For the courage to see, to feel, to let go, and to grow. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt whole. Summer had arrived quietly, carrying warmth that lingered in the mornings and evenings alike. The light poured through my windows in soft, golden streams, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel heavy or harsh. It felt like an invitation to wake, to breathe, to live. I found myself rising earlier than usual, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. Curiosity about what the day might bring, and about the woman I was becoming. I made my coffee, the familiar steam curling into the air, and sat at the kitchen table looking out at the garden. The flowers Mrs. Green and I had nurtured together were blooming fully now. Roses in deep red and soft pink, white lilies swaying gently in the morning breeze, and lavender that smelled faintly of summer rain. Every morning, the garden reminded me that growth is slow, deliberate, and worth the effort, and sometimes it takes time for the beauty to emerge. I had started taking long walks again, exploring streets I'd never noticed before. Neighborhoods filled with houses and gardens, children playing in yards, people walking dogs or tending their lawns. It felt good to be a part of the world again, without expecting it to be about me or my past. The days were quiet, but not lonely. I ran into Mrs. Green often during these walks, sometimes by chance, sometimes because I sought her out. We talk about flowers, recipes, local news, ordinary conversations that somehow felt extraordinary. She had become more than a neighbor. She was my friend, my confidant, my guide through this new chapter of life. One morning, as we watered the garden together, she paused and looked at me. "You're different, Ellen," she said softly. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I feel different," I admitted. "I feel lighter, like I'm finally breathing again." She nodded, eyes twinkling. That's the thing about life. Sometimes it breaks you so you can be rebuilt, stronger, wiser, more present. You've reached that place now. I thought about the long months of grief, betrayal, and doubt that had come before this. It hadn't been easy. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, when tears blurred my vision, when the weight of what Daniel had done seemed unbearable. But now those nights were memories, not chains. And I was finally free to step forward. I also began to rediscover old hobbies and passions I had set aside. I started painting again, small, simple watercolors of the garden, the trees, the sky at sunrise. I would sit on the porch with my easel, letting the colors flow quietly, the brush in my hand steady and familiar. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. And sometimes Mrs. Green would sit with me, watching as I worked. She didn't give advice or critique. She just appreciated the moment with me. Her presence reminded me that companionship doesn't always need words. Sometimes, just being together is enough. By midsummer, I had started volunteering more consistently at the library. Reading to children on Saturday mornings became a new ritual. Their laughter, their curiosity, their questions and smiles reminded me of innocence and joy that still existed in the world. I loved seeing their eyes widen as I read aloud, or hearing their excited chatter after a story ended. Through these moments, I felt my own heart heal in ways I hadn't expected. I realized that giving of myself, my time, my attention, my care, helped fill the spaces left empty by betrayal and loss. I was creating new patterns, new rhythms for life, and discovering that happiness isn't found in grand gestures. It's found in small, consistent acts of presence and kindness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in orange and violet, I sat on the porch with Mrs. Green. We watched fireflies emerge from the garden, blinking softly in the twilight. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of flowers. "I think this is my favorite time of year," I said. She smiled. "Mine too. There's something peaceful about knowing the day is ending. Yet life continues on. Every evening is a new dawn in itself." I nodded, taking a deep breath. I thought about the months that had passed, the shock, the betrayal, the grief, and the slow, careful reconstruction of my heart. It had all led to this moment, quiet, safe, and full of possibility. A week later, I decided to take a short trip, just a weekend away to see the world outside my small town. I packed a bag with a few essentials, my sketchbook, and a sense of excitement I hadn't felt in years. Before I left, I walked across the yard to Mrs. Green's house. She greeted me with a warm hug, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Promise me you'll enjoy yourself," she said. "Take in everything you can, and when you come back, life will be waiting for you, brighter than ever. I promise," I said. Her hand lingered on mine for a moment. "Remember, Ellen, you don't have to be afraid anymore. You've found your courage." And for the first time in a long time, I felt that courage fully, in every fiber of my being. The trip was simple, but beautiful. I stayed in a small cottage by a lake where the water reflected the sky like a mirror. I walked along the shore each morning, collected pebbles and leaves, and painted quietly in the afternoons. I thought about the past, but I didn't dwell on it. I thought about the future, but I didn't rush toward it. I simply existed in each moment, savoring the rhythm of life without fear. It was liberating. I realized that the pain of the past didn't have to dictate my present or my future. I could carry the lessons and leave the weight behind. When I returned home, the garden greeted me like an old friend. Mrs. Green was there, waiting with iced tea and a smile. We sat together on the porch, talking about the small wonders of life, the blooms, the birds, the way the sun warmed the porch in the late afternoon. It occurred to me that life didn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful. The greatest gifts are often quiet, ordinary moments shared with someone who sees you clearly. Mrs. Green had become that person for me, my guide, my mirror, my anchor. And through her friendship, I discovered the resilience that had always been inside me. Weeks passed, and life settled into a gentle rhythm. I no longer feared the silence of the house. I no longer felt the shadow of betrayal lingering over me. Instead, I woke with intention, moved through the day with care, and rested at night with gratitude. I had learned that healing isn't linear. It comes in pieces, as I had discovered in the garden, in the library, in the quiet conversations on Mrs. Green's porch. And with patience, love, and courage, those pieces eventually create something whole. One evening, as summer gave way to early fall, I stood in the garden and breathed deeply. The flowers were fading, their petals softening and falling to the earth. But I didn't see it as loss. I saw it as transformation. A reminder that life moves forward, that endings are beginnings, and that every season carries its own beauty. I whispered a quiet thank you to Mrs. Green, to the garden, to the world. Thank you for patience, for courage, for friendship, for teaching me how to stand tall again. And in that moment, I knew that a new dawn had truly arrived. Not just in the garden, not just in the morning sun, but in me. I was whole, I was free, and I was ready for whatever life might bring next. By the time early fall arrived, I had discovered a rhythm to my days that felt both steady and nourishing. I woke with the sun, filled my mornings with coffee and quiet reflection, and let the soft light filter through the windows as I worked in the garden or painted in the studio corner I had set up by the bay window. The house no longer felt empty. Instead, it felt like a space that belonged entirely to me, a place where every corner reflected choices I had made, moments I had nurtured, and growth I had earned. Mrs. Green became a constant presence, not because she had to be, but because she had chosen to be. We shared long afternoons on the porch, hands occasionally brushing as we poured tea, silent laughter echoing in the warm, lazy air. Her stories of past joys and quiet sorrows reminded me that life is rarely perfect, and yet it is always worth living fully. One morning, as we worked together in the garden, Mrs. Green handed me a small empty journal. "I want you to fill this with everything you've learned," she said. Her voice was soft, calm, but carried a weight of wisdom. I took the journal, tracing my fingers over the cover. "What should I write?" I asked, unsure. "Anything," she said. "Your thoughts, your fears, your victories, small or large. And most importantly, what you've discovered about yourself." I nodded, tucking the journal under my arm. For the first time, I realized that strength isn't always loud or obvious. It's quiet. It's steady. It's the kind of courage that shows up in the simple, daily acts of caring for yourself and the people around you. I began writing that evening. At first, the words came slowly, hesitant, almost reluctant. But as the pages filled, I felt a release I hadn't known I needed. I wrote about the betrayal, yes, But I also wrote about mornings spent painting, afternoons reading to children at the library, and evenings sipping tea with Mrs. Green as the sun set behind the trees. I wrote about the fear I had felt after discovering Daniel's affair, the loneliness that had settled in like dust, and the courage it had taken to face those truths. And I wrote about the growth, the small victories, the quiet moments of joy that had reminded me I could still love life, even after being hurt. By the time I closed the journal, I felt lighter, more grounded, and more connected to the woman I had become. Life, of course, wasn't perfect. There were still moments when I remembered Daniel, when memories of our shared past rose unbidden and tugged at my heart. But those moments no longer held power over me. I didn't dread them, nor did I chase them. I simply acknowledged them, let them pass, and returned to the present, to the garden, the paintings, the children's laughter, and Mrs. Green's quiet companionship. It was in these ordinary moments that I discovered the real depth of my strength, not in dramatic confrontations or bold declarations, but in the simple choices, to rise each morning, to care for myself, to nurture life, and to trust in the goodness still present in the world. One Saturday morning, while reading to a group of children at the library, I noticed a small boy struggling with a difficult word. I knelt beside him, gently guiding him through it, and watched as his face lit up with pride when he finally succeeded. It struck me then how much healing comes from small acts of patience and encouragement. The boy didn't know it, but his joy echoed within me, reinforcing the quiet confidence I had built over the months. It reminded me that strength often comes from the connections we forge, from the care we give, and from the empathy we offer, not from revenge or resentment. That afternoon, Mrs. Green and I walked to the park, our conversation flowing easily between memories, gardening tips, and books we had read. We paused to sit on a bench beneath a large oak tree, watching the children run and laugh in the sunlight. "You've changed," she said softly, not as a critique, but as an observation. I looked at her, curious. "You used to carry the weight of everyone else's expectations," she continued. "Your marriage, your household, your appearances, all of it. But now you walk lightly. You carry only what belongs to you, and it suits you beautifully." I smiled, feeling the truth in her words settle in my chest. For so long, I had measured my worth by the wrong standards. By a husband who had betrayed me, by appearances that masked the truth, by the quiet need to be seen as perfect. Now I measured my worth differently, by my resilience, my kindness, my ability to find joy and meaning in each day. As autumn approached, I noticed other small shifts in my life. I started reconnecting with old friends, reaching out with messages or phone calls I had delayed for years. Some responded warmly, eager to rebuild connections. Others didn't, and I didn't force it. It became clear to me that the people who stay in your life are those who respect your growth, your boundaries, and your strength. And I was finally at a point where I could let go of anyone who did not align with that truth. Even Daniel became a quiet presence in my reflections, not in longing or bitterness, but as a reminder of what I had endured and overcome. I forgave him, not for his sake, but for mine. And in that forgiveness, I discovered the peace I had long sought, the ability to look back without flinching, to acknowledge the pain without letting it define me, and to embrace the woman I had become. One crisp autumn evening, Mrs. Green and I sat on her porch with hot tea, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The air smelled faintly of fallen leaves and smoke from distant chimneys. "You've found something most people never do," she said softly. I tilted my head. "Quiet strength," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "Not the kind that shouts or demands attention, the kind that grows slowly, steadily, and endures." I nodded, understanding fully what she meant. My strength wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy, but it was real, and it carried me through every heartbreak, every moment of doubt, every night of sleeplessness. It had carried me into a life filled with simple joys, deep friendships, and a clear understanding of my own worth. That night, I returned home and stood in the doorway of my house, looking around. The rooms were filled with light and quiet memories of growth. Every corner spoke of healing: the garden, the books, the paintings, the small rituals I had established. I realized then that life doesn't always have dramatic revelations. Sometimes it whispers its lessons softly, and you only notice when you've grown enough to hear them. I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of completeness I hadn't known was possible. I was no longer defined by betrayal or loss. I was defined by resilience, courage, and the quiet power of reclaiming my own life. The next morning, I woke early, as I often did, and stepped onto the porch with a cup of tea. The air was crisp, the sky painted in pale hues of orange and pink. I watched as Mrs. Green tended her garden across the yard, humming softly to herself. The world felt steady and kind, a place where healing and growth were possible. I whispered a quiet thank you to her, to the universe, and to myself, for the courage to face the truth, for the patience to heal, for the quiet strength that had carried me here, and in that moment I knew with certainty that no matter what the future held, I was ready, strong, whole, and at peace. The first frost of the year came quietly, covering the garden with a thin layer of glistening white. I stood on the porch, wrapped in a warm shawl, watching the sunlight sparkle on the fallen leaves and the tips of the roses that stubbornly refused to fade. Everything felt still, and yet alive. It struck me how much had changed since that morning Mrs. Green knocked on my door. I remembered the panic, the confusion, the sense of foreboding that had pressed against my chest. I remembered the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the months of emptiness that had followed. And I remembered how slowly, day by day, I had rebuilt myself piece by piece with the help of a neighbor who became so much more. I smiled softly. Life had a way of circling back, full circle, and bringing lessons when we were ready to receive them. The house felt warm and inviting that morning, even though the air outside had a crisp edge. I walked through the rooms, pausing to notice the details I had missed in the past, the way the sunlight hit the walls, the faint scent of the lavender candles I had lit the night before, the quiet hum of the heater. Each room seemed alive with memory, but not with pain. It was as if the house itself had forgiven the past and allowed me to step fully into the present. Mrs. Green arrived that afternoon, a basket of freshly baked bread in her hands. She smiled warmly when she saw me, her eyes crinkling in that familiar way. "Thought you might like something for tea," she said, setting the basket down on the kitchen counter. "I can't imagine better company," I replied, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Her presence, calm and steady, had become a cornerstone of my life. Through her friendship, I had learned the quiet strength that carried me through heartbreak, through uncertainty, and into this new season of life. We sat together in the kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the windows, and I realized how ordinary moments had become extraordinary. No dramatic revelations, no sudden miracles, just two women sharing tea, stories, and silence. And yet, that was enough. "I was thinking," Mrs. Green said softly, "that maybe you should start teaching your painting classes again." I looked at her, surprised. "I don't know if I'm ready for that yet," I admitted. "Why not?" she asked, tilting her head. "You've already given yourself the greatest gift, the gift of healing. Sharing your art, your vision, your voice would only give that gift to others." I thought about it, and for the first time I didn't feel fear. I felt curiosity, excitement, a quiet determination that whatever I tried next, I would do on my own terms, whole, confident, and at peace. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we walked through the garden together. The roses, now dusted with frost, swayed gently in the breeze. The hydrangeas had gone dormant, their leaves curling and brown, but still standing tall. "I never imagined life could feel this full again," I said softly. Mrs. Green smiled. "Life is full, Ellen, even after heartbreak. It just waits for us to find the pieces again." I nodded, realizing she was right. Everything I had lost, my trust, my confidence, my sense of self, had been quietly returned to me through patience, friendship, and the courage to face the truth. And now I could move forward without fear or hesitation. Weeks turned into months. I began offering small painting classes at the library, sharing my love for art with children and adults alike. I watched their faces light up when they completed a piece, and I felt my own heart swell with pride and joy. It was a simple act, but it reminded me that giving of ourselves, even in small ways, can create ripples far beyond what we imagine. I also began taking short trips, sometimes alone, sometimes with Mrs. Green. We explored nearby towns, visited gardens, and sat by lakes, letting the world remind us of its beauty and vastness. Through these travels, I discovered that life is not just about enduring pain. It's about embracing wonder, connection, and the freedom to be fully ourselves. One crisp winter morning, I received a call from my sister. "Ellen," she said, her voice warm, "I just wanted to hear your voice. You sound happy." I laughed softly. "I am. I think I finally am." She paused, then said, "I'm proud of you. Truly proud. You've found your way back to yourself." Her words made me realize how far I had come. I was no longer the woman waiting for validation from a man who had betrayed me. I was no longer haunted by fear or regret. I was simply Ellen, strong, whole, and capable of living fully. If you've made it this far, you're one of the few people who truly listens deeply. I'd love to know which idea so far has made you stop and think the most. Leave a thought below, and I'll feature one in the next episode. That afternoon, I walked to Mrs. Green's house, the snow crunching softly beneath my boots. She was waiting at the door, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate, and smiled when she saw me. "You've come a long way, Ellen," she said, handing me a mug. "And I couldn't have done it without you," I replied sincerely. We sat together by the fire, the room filled with warmth, the soft glow reflecting in our eyes. For the first time, I felt a sense of full circle, of ending one chapter and beginning another with grace, peace, and hope. Life, I realized, is rarely neat. It doesn't provide perfect endings or flawless resolutions. It gives us experiences, sometimes painful, sometimes beautiful, and leaves it up to us to find meaning in them. And sometimes, the people we least expect become our anchors, the neighbors, the friends, the quiet souls who step into our lives when we need them most. Mrs. Green had been that anchor. She had saved me, not with dramatic gestures, but with kindness, wisdom, and unwavering presence. Through her, I had learned that life could be trusted again, that joy could be found in small moments, and that healing is always possible. In the months that followed, I continued to nurture the garden, paint in my studio, teach and explore. I allowed myself to dream again, to imagine a life unburdened by betrayal, a life filled with connection, creativity, and love in its many forms. And in every ordinary moment, I found extraordinary beauty, in sunlight, in laughter, in friendship, and in the quiet knowledge that I had emerged stronger than I ever thought possible. One morning, as I sipped tea on the porch and watched frost glitter on the branches, I realized something profound. I had come full circle, from fear to trust, from despair to hope, from loss to wholeness. And in that moment, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for every step of the journey, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the quiet mornings of reflection, and the unwavering presence of someone who believed in me when I could not. I smiled softly, lifting my mug to the rising sun. "Thank you," I whispered, to Mrs. Green, to life, and to myself. For the courage to heal, for the strength to forgive, for the wisdom to embrace a new dawn. And as the sun broke fully over the horizon, warming the frost-kissed garden, I knew that I was ready for whatever came next, for whatever life had to offer, strong, whole, free. If you agree with me and liked my story, show it by giving this video a like. Let's see how many of us feel the same. I'm curious, what city are you listening from? And what time is it there? Write it in the comments. If you'd like to support my journey, you can send me a small donation. Thank you for listening and sharing your precious time with me. For more life stories like this one, check out the other videos on my channel and subscribe. I've added 2 new stories on the screen that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Click one and start listening now. Love to you all.